Good morning. This is Kingdom in Context. I'm Sean, your host, and you're actually watching Torah Portions. It's a part of our Torah Apologetics series. Thanks to your patience, we had some technical difficulties trying to get some of the buttons to press right and the buttons to work. They weren't actually working. I had to reprogram them real quick. So thanks for your patience. We're here, and we're going to be reviewing Exodus 21 through the end of Exodus 24. Continue on in our Torah portions and just expounding upon apologetics about why these things are relevant to our lives as believers, how it plays a part in our discipleship, how we can defend these ideas to unbelievers and better explain them. And really, the whole idea of apologetics is that you are defending an idea to someone that is antagonistic against the idea. We face this in the world everywhere we go. The way I like to view it in my mind, though, is not that I'm defending it, because it's not the person that is, quote unquote, attacking it. They're not doing so 9 out of 10 times. They're not doing so because they understand it and then they have decided to hate it. They're doing so because they don't understand it, and their frustration turns into questions that come across like attacking. So in my mind, what helps ease my heart dealing with those situations as well as my patience is I view it more along the lines of, I don't need to, I am defending it, obviously. That's why it's called apologetics, but I'm trying to do it in a vein of explaining it as I would a friend, right? You have this understanding that they're in confusion and you want to better explain the idea to them. So I try to do it with that type of mindset, that type of disposition, that it's not an actual battle with my brethren over these ideas. It's just simply, he's really, really frustrated because he doesn't understand it and no one's ever given a good answer to him. So I'm going to do my best to explain it to him with love and patience, give him a good answer. But in order to get to that point, you have to know the text, you have to be familiar with what it says, and you have to kind of break it down and study it for yourself so you can understand how it applies to your life and everyone else's, and why it's good wisdom, why it's good instruction from our Heavenly Father on how to live our lives. Thanks for joining us. That's why we're here. I want to say hello to a few people in the chat. Looks like there's a lot of people here already this morning. Hope y'all are having a good Shabbat. If you celebrate Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom to you. Hope that you're getting some good rest today. Let me just look like Wendy Russell's here, Lynn Jones, Mary Slattery, Mike K. Gunder, Gilbert Miranda, Blue Doves, Sister Payne, Miss Marcia, Hallelujah. Welcome, everyone. David Gooley, Shannon Polklo, Misha Kim is here. Welcome, welcome. Scott McVicker, Choice Fathom, Mark Allen, Charlie Hanscom. Welcome back, everybody. Sylvia G. Sean M. Welcome, everyone. Nikki Latimer, Carolyn Begner, D Love, Cover to Cover with Jeremy Pierce. Welcome, everybody. GR Cleve, Vicky F, Elias Stewart, welcome back. David Shear, welcome. Thank you to all the mods who are here. I really appreciate you guys helping us keep the chat civil and loving and dropping links when you have an opportunity. Maxim Lavrov is back. Yaya Q, Jared Mead, and a lot more people planted in the word. So guys, today, as we do these Torah portions, if you're new to this, first time you've seen us, what we try to do is a little different than maybe some other shows where I go over the main Torah portions. So I'm going to put these on screen to show them talk about. I will actually review the main Torah portions. Switch that. As you can see on screen, Exodus 21 through 24. So after each chapter, not the companion passages below, but after each chapter of the main portions, you can call in if you'd like to and speak to me live. And here is that call-in link. I'm going to put at the bottom of the screen. Okay, guys. And let's also, I'll drop it in the chat real quick. So just make sure that you're ready to call in. Obviously, be comfortable in front of the camera. If you're not, just ask your question in the chat. But if you want to call in, you have an option to do that. You can speak with me live. And but that's only going to be after each chapter, each main chapter of Exodus that we're reading. Okay. So if you call in before I'm done with each main chapter in Exodus, you're just going to sit in the studio and you won't be able to see anything until I let you into the broadcast. Okay. So just be aware of that. All right, guys. So let's get started looking at this today. So this is going to be Exodus 21. These are the ordinances that you set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he's to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year, he shall go free without payment anything. If he arrived alone, he is to leave alone. If he arrived with a wife, she is to leave with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him a son or bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to the master, and only the man shall go free. But if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children, I do not want to go free, then his master is to bring him before the judges, and he shall take him to the door or outpost or doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl. Then he shall serve his master for life. 7 through 13. And if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as the men servants do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master who had designated her for himself, he must allow her to be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners, since he's broken faith with her. And if he chooses her for his son, he must deal with her as a daughter. If he takes another wife, he must not reduce food, clothing, or marital rights of his first wife. If, however, he does not provide her with these three things, she is free to go without monetary payment. Whoever strikes and kills a man must surely be put to death. And if, however, he did not lie in wait, but God allowed it to happen, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. But if a man schemes and acts willfully against his neighbor to kill him, you must take him away from my altar to be put to death. Whoever strikes his father or mother must surely be put to death. Whoever kidnaps another man must be put to death, whether he sells him or the man is found in his possession. Anyone who curses his father or mother surely must be put to death. If men are quarreling and one strikes the other with a stone or a fist, and he does not die but is confined to bed, then the one who struck him shall go unpunished, as long as the other can get up and walk around outside with his staff. Nevertheless, he must compensate the man for his lost work and see that he is completely healed. If a man strikes his manservant or maidservant with a rod, and the servant dies by his hand, he shall surely be punished. However, if the servant gets up after a day or two, the owner shall not be punished, since the servant is his property. If men who are fighting strike a pregnant woman and her child is born prematurely, but there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband demands and as court allows. But if a serious injury results, then he must require a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a stripe for a stripe. If a man strikes and blinds the eye of the manservant and maidservant, he must let the servant go free as compensation for the eye. And guys, we're going to, just so you know, we're going to discuss all these things. I know there's a lot of meat in here, but we're going to discuss all these things in our companion passages. And if he knocks out the tooth of his manservant or maidservant, he must let the servant go free as compensation for the tooth. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox must surely be stoned, and its meat must not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall not be held responsible. If the ox has a habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, yet does not restrain it, and it kills a man or a woman, then the ox must be stoned, and its owner also must be put to death. If payment is demanded of him instead, he may redeem his life by paying the full amount demanded of him. If the ox scores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. If the ox scores a manservant or a maidservant, the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver to the master of the servant, and the ox must be stoned. If a man opens a dig or digs a pit and fails to cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He must pay its owner, and the dead animal will be his. If a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox and it dies, then they must sell the live one and divide the proceeds. They also must divide the dead animal. But it was not known that the ox had a habit of goring, yet its owner failed to restrain it. He shall pay full compensation, ox for ox, and the dead animal will be his. All right, so that was the first passage there in Exodus 21. There's a lot of meat in there, and we're going to go over it real quick because this is one of the biggest chapters, guys, that actually supports. And this is what I'm about to say. You might think I'm crazy, but just wait, just follow, keep following. This is Exodus 21 is one of the biggest chapters that actually supports women's rights. It actually supports the protection of women according to the Father. Now, there's a lot more protections in here as well, as far as property, land ownership, relations with neighbors, things like that. But we're going to dig into some of the very first verses here because it actually reviews and goes over how a woman is protected by the Father within a family situation, within a marriage situation, and it's wonderful. It's truly wonderful. Okay, so let's look at some of this together real quick. These are the ordinances that you're to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year, he shall go free without paying anything. Okay, so this is not, and we're gonna get into this with companion passages as well, as you'll see that they could not just go and randomly buy somebody. Okay, this is not forced slave trade. We're actually going to be talking about those verses here later, where it says specifically, "Do not engage in a slave trade." Okay, so this is why some translations will say slave in this passage here, and that's usually from the 15th century carryover, 15th century KJV, Old English. That word slavery has taken on a very negative connotation in the United States, and because of the media around the world, it's originally was what's called indentured servitude. Okay, so this is why many translations will use the word servant, because that's literally what the Hebrew word means. It means servant. So as an actual servant, the reason why he would buy them is because they were in debt to him. So he would need to pay off a debt. So therefore, in order for the master of the property or the person that is owed the debt, if he was to buy somebody, that means he has to care for that person while that person works off his debt for him. So even in this scenario, the servant is being cared for by the person that quote unquote bought him, to the point where he can't abuse him. We're going to go over the scriptures later. He can't abuse him. We just saw the fact that if he's, if he needs discipline, he gets struck with a rod. If it's too much, you can't beat them to death, obviously. But this was an idea of, if it was physical punishment. Yes, a lot of people don't like that idea, but that's, some people are raised with different mentalities, right? But there was physical punishment if a person was not doing what he was supposed to do. So we're going to talk about this, the creditors, the debtors being sold for debts that you owed and paid. In modern days, we don't think like this, because in a modern day, if you owe someone a debt, they either take you to court and they sue you, and the court has it garnished out of your wages, or you get a second job and you try to pay it off by working extra in your own life. Whereas in the past, it wasn't always that easy. Many times it would be much easier for you. Imagine, instead of having to go out and get a second job, imagine if all your living expenses were paid for by the person that owed your debt, and you went and worked directly for him. So all of the things, all the produce that you created, all the profit, if you will, that you created with your daily labor went directly towards your debt, while all of your basic needs for you and your whole family were taken care of. How fast would you pay that debt off? You would pay it off quickly. That was the point. So the idea for a gentleman to actually collect on the debt under this circumstance meant that the circumstances for the person paying the debt off was far, far easier and better, and it got paid off faster than what we try to endure today by keeping our own domicile and living and trying to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to make the extra, which puts a lots of strain on the family and the wife and the children and all that kind of stuff, because suddenly you're gone. You're gone from their presence. That's not a normal atmosphere. So this whole concept was built in so that you could basically have a better experience paying your debt off faster to get you back to a sense of, independence. So it's just an interesting dynamic, very different culture. And this was how Yahweh was instructing it to be done, basically. So it's very interesting. But we go down here and it says, if he arrived alone with his wife, she's to leave with him. If he arrives alone, he's to leave alone. So obviously, right? If he didn't marry during that time, and it actually goes over the fact that if the master actually allows him to marry one of his maidservants, then the children, they're all belonging to the master, because that was essentially like his daughter. It's like his. But if he wants to stay in this scenario, if he wants to stay and keep the wife and the children, then he has to be a lifelong servant. Basically, he's going to be employed by that guy for the rest of his life. This is not slave labor. This is being a servant. This is like indentured servitude to it's an agreement mutually agreed upon by both parties that they want to engage in this pact to help each other be mutually prosperous in business. The man does not have to take a wife from the owner of the debt if he doesn't want to. So this is a great example. Like I don't have the verse compared, but like think about Eliezer. That was a servant given to Abraham, and he stayed with him his whole life. So he chose to because he loved his master, right? He enjoyed where he was. He enjoyed being around that fellowship. He enjoyed who he worked for. He wasn't treated like a slave. In fact, Abraham was considering leaving his inheritance to Eliezer until Isaac was born. So when Torah is done properly, everyone's shown the proper amount of love and respect. It's only our modern culture that has very unique ideas of what workers' rights are and what they, it's usually based upon communist ideals that try to infuse this idea of injustice or inequality, that you're owed more than you're really worth, and all these kinds of things. But what we're reading right here is a completely different economic system that was based off mutual respect and value, also giving you the opportunity to get out of financial trouble faster than any other form of compensation. So it's very, very interesting. Let's go to the next verses, because this is where it gets spicy, guys. And this is actually where I wanted to show you the difference here with the Septuagint versus the Masoretic text. It says, if a man, in verse 7, it says, if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she's not to go free as the men servants do. And I want you guys to check this out. This is crazy. The Septuagint paints a totally different light, and in my opinion, it makes much, much more sense with the context. So I'm going to put this on screen. All right. Hopefully you guys can see this. So we'll go to the Septuagint version of Exodus 21:7. And look what it says in the same passage. If anyone sells his daughter as a domestic, she shall not depart as the maidservants depart. Well, that's a little different, isn't it, than what it says here. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she's not to go free as the men servants do. The Septuagint says, if anyone sells his daughter as a domestic, that means to become a wife to somebody. She shall not depart as the maidservants depart. So it's not men servants, it says maidservants here. Why? Because she's been given to another man as his wife. This isn't the idea of just selling your daughter into servitude. So as we read the rest of this passage down here, hopefully it makes a little bit more sense of why this poor translation of the Masoretic in verse 7 does not make sense, and why the Septuagint will make more sense. Check it out. So if she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who had designated for her for himself, he must allow her to be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners, since he has broken faith with her. This isn't talking about just a female that's working for him as a servant. This is his wife. This is the same instruction we see about a bride in Deuteronomy 22 that's lost favor with the husband. He must redeem her, and he can't just sell her. He is the one that's broken faith with her. She has done no wrong. This is protecting her. Where did she come from? She came from her father's household, where she was protected. She's not being this statement, or this whole context here is not about a woman being sold into slavery willy-nilly. This is not about a woman that's just being given into some kind of servitude against her will. She's been given as a wife to this man. And he must treat her with all these conditions of respect. Verse 9, if he chooses her for his son, which means he's choosing her as a wife for his son, then he must deal with her as a daughter, which means she's suddenly taken care of under the daughter's rights, which is just as honorable as the wife. She's not going to lack for anything. Verse 10, if he takes another wife, why would it say that? Even in the Masoretic, it gives you a clue, right? If we're kind of deducing where bad translations happen, look at this in verse 11 or verse 10. It says, if he takes another wife, he must not reduce the food, clothing, or marital rights of his first wife. Why? Because in verse 7, it just mentioned and introduced the idea of him bringing in a first wife. This is what helps us better understand this with the Septuagint. Hopefully that makes a lot more sense. I've seen a lot of atheists and a lot of people really struggle with Exodus 21:7, thinking that, oh yeah, I'm just gonna, God did things differently back then, so it was okay if it was a different culture, so they sold people like that. And I'm like, no, that's not what this verse is even saying. This is about giving a daughter as a bride to another man, and how he must treat her with different types of respect. So, verse 11, if, however, he does not provide her with these three things, she's to go free without monetary payment. That means if he breaks faith with her, if he breaks the Torah against how he's supposed to treat her, she doesn't have to stay. The woman cannot just be disrespected and kept around. Think about how much protection this provides for the women of Israel. How beautiful the Father has orchestrated his law to protect the women of Israel. It's amazing. Verse 12, whoever strikes and kills a man must surely be put to death. We already went over that. This is where it goes into eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And guys, if you guys have already seen, I actually have a morning cup of context called eye for an eye. I believe that's all it's called, eye for an eye. And I go over the idea that it's compensation. It's not literally, if your eye gets gouged or damaged and you got to go gouge the person that accidentally hurt you or damaged you. No, it actually explains that even in the text, as you can see, where it does say the idea of compensation must happen according to what was lost. So let me go to the passage here. Verse 24 is the famous moment where people will quote this and say, oh, well then, if you think you're keeping Torah, then why aren't you going out and plucking out people's eyes? Well, that's not the application of the scripture. This is an idiomatic phrase that explaining compensation must be met. So the cost, just like it mentions about the person that has lost wages in the previous verse. Let me go back up real quick. So if you look at verse, I'm sorry, one second. Look at verse 19. It says, "And the one who struck him shall go unpunished as long as the other can get up and walk around outside with his staff. Nevertheless, he must compensate the man for his lost works and see that he's completely healed." So you can't, like, if you're striking someone to the point of injury, you got to compensate them, and there's going to be further penalties involved because now you struck a man unto injury. In addition to money, there may be other penalties involved. But that's why you have to make sure he's completely healed. But you've already given him money because he's lost wages for the time that he was down. So this is why you can't mistreat, and we're going to go over the companion verses that talk about you can't mistreat those who are working for you as servants. In the same way, if a man in verse 20, if a man strikes his maidservant or manservant with a rod, and the servant dies by his hand, he shall surely be punished. However, if the servant gets up after a day or two, the owner shall go unpunished, since the servant is his property. If the men who are fighting strike a pregnant woman and her child is born prematurely, there's no further injury, he shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband demands, as the court allows. Here's more context to this whole passage, explaining that there's physical, financial compensation for any type of stress or physical injury due to conflict. This is very, very similar, if not almost identical, to the laws we have in the United States today, pertaining to this type of, domestic violence or conflict between two men, and the resulting physical bodily injury that's involved. The eye for an eye thing was not meaning that you literally, if you accidentally crush someone's hand in a machine at work because you were negligent, doesn't mean he gets to go crush your hand. No, it means that there's financial compensation that would happen. Think of G.G. Wentworth, right? I want my money now, right? So there was some version of that in the Old Testament where the guy was like, all right, you messed up my hand. I can't work the same way, so I need compensation for this. They would be brought before the judges to be determined what is proper compensation for that. This is what the Levites were, and the elders were appointed as judges to proceed and preside over. So, as you can see here, verse 26, if a man strikes and blinds the eye of his maidservant or menservant or maidservant, he must let the servant go free as compensation for the eye. So the owner doesn't get his eye struck by the servant and lose his eye. Right? That old saying, if it truly was eye for an eye, the world would be blind. That's not what the scriptures are saying. This is an idiomatic phrase that's pertaining to judicial compensation for injury. So this is why it says, if you would literally, instead, it gives you the recompense. It tells you the action, the outcome. It says you must let the servant go free as compensation for the eye. What if there was a massive debt and that servant, the man who owned that debt, like we read back in verse 1 of Exodus 21:1, if you buy a Hebrew servant, that means he's working a debt out for you. And if you end up striking him to where you've abused him and actually injured him to the point of blinding his eye, then you got to let him go. It doesn't matter how much he owes you anymore. You suddenly cost whatever that debt was what you basically lost for blinding that dude and physically hurting that guy. Do you see how that even the servants are protected from physical harm? This isn't an oppressive slavery concept like is portrayed in modernity. This was a servanthood. This is a indentured servanthood that had equal protection of rights for everyone involved. So I'm trying not to, sound like a lawyer today, but this is legalities of, human interaction. So hopefully this is making some sense to you. Same thing, it says if he knocks out his tooth, he is to be let go for compensation for the tooth. It doesn't mean that the guy can suddenly get up and go knock out the tooth of the dude who did it to him. That's not what that idiomatic phrase means. So guys, if people try to bring that up to you, hopefully now you have a way to better explain that to them, to understand. You show them the context of the verses and the actual outcome that is literally typed out for us in the text to tell us what would happen. Then he goes into the, animals dealing with each other. We're not going to deal with that too much this week. But clearly, if you have an ox that is known for goring, it says it has a habit of goring, and the owner has not restrained him, and that ox, that animal ends up going out and killing someone, then the owner's responsible. So that's to make sure they're cared for, to make sure they have proper fencing, to make sure that they're not harming other people, right? So this is, there is so much protection built in for life of all these types of interactions just in one little chapter. It's amazing. Same thing with, people that are, you've left a pit open, you've dug some kind of hole, you've did some kind of construction on your land, and you haven't properly secured it, so that someone comes along and falls into it and has injured themselves, or an animal, yeah, you're going to be responsible. So that, it's all this type of stuff. That's why it says at the bottom of verse 36, he shall pay full compensation. So this is where, this is not, sorry guys, I'm a little excited and speaking a little too fast. The enemy wants you to take the Father's words out of context. That's how he keeps people from accepting faith in God and his son, Yeshua of Nazareth. To prevent that, you have to show them the context. You have to do whatever you can to get them to focus long enough to say, I know that's what you've been told. Can I show you what it actually says, though? Because it's very different. And then you can decide, then you're better informed to decide whether you want to reject it or not, because then at least you'll know what it actually says. What it actually says is literally the basis of how we've started our legal precedents for most laws in the United States. People just don't realize that, though. They think it's archaic, written by desert wanderers in the Bronze Age, and it's literally just, oh, you hurt somebody, I'm going to chop your arm off. They think it's barbaric. They don't realize this is God's heavenly law, the one that he and the angels keep in heaven. So therefore, it's perfect. And it respects people. It's equitable. It's loving. It's fair. It's true justice. And let's look at some companion passages. Guys, like I said, I've already covered the first chapter, so if you have any questions and you want to call in to discuss anything we've read, you're welcome to do that as I read these companion passages, and we'll be glad to get to your question. All right, Leviticus 25, and let's look at some of these verses real quick, because this is going to expound upon what we read. Even though this is still a part of the Torah, I think it's good for people to explain the Word of God with the Word of God, right? I don't think that we don't need apologetics that are built upon lots of men's philosophy. I think we need apologetics built upon explaining the Word with the Word. That's what a teacher of Israel would have done. Verse 39, Leviticus 25, if a countryman of yours becomes so poor with regard to you that he sells himself to you, that's exactly what we just read in Exodus 21:1. You shall not subject him to a slave's service. So this is the bigger dish. Now, there's a difference in a slave service about people that were taken in from other countries through war and how they had to do something with them. So there was very different scenario as far as the rights of the man and the women that worked in your household as your servants, even under the guise of them owing you something or needing work because they've become so poor. Okay, so this is the idea. This he's destitute for whatever reason. He can't support himself, so he's going to go work for someone else. So therefore, there's suddenly workers' rights become involved. Okay, so verse 40, he shall be with you as a hired worker, as if you were a foreign resident. Oh, look at that. Suddenly, everything is about to describe that defends the rights of this hired worker would apply to a foreign resident. You guys see how that works? What does it say in Leviticus also, that you should treat the foreigner as yourself? There's one law for Israel, applies to the foreigner, the sojourner, and the native born. How beautiful is this, guys? Verse 41, he shall then leave you, he and his sons with him, and he shall go back to his family, so that he may return to the property of his forefathers. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They are not to be sold in a slave cell. You shall not rule over them with severity, but are to revere your God. As for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may acquire male and female slaves from the pagan nations that are around you. There's a typo there. You may also acquire them from the sons of the foreign residents who reside among you, and from their families who are with you, whom you will have produced in your land. They also may become your possession. You may also pass them on as inheritance to your sons after you. Now, let me stop real quick. Verse 45. You may also acquire them from the sons of the foreign residents who reside among you, and from their families who are with you, whom they will have produced in your land. They also may become your possession. Why? Can you just randomly go up to a foreigner and his family and say, I'm going to buy your son? And the dude's like, okay. No. Look at this. Look at the previous verse. Verse 39. If a countryman of yours becomes so poor with regard to you that he sells himself to you, you shall not subject him to a slave service. Verse 40. He shall be with you as a hired worker, as if he were a foreign resident. So both scenarios. One of your own countrymen, one of your own sons of Israel, or another foreigner that's sojourning in the land of Israel with you, one of his sons, if they become so poor so as to need work from you, you treat them the same. This is not saying you can just randomly go buy slaves. This is not even the word slavery. It's the idea of a servant. It's someone that literally is hiring employees. Think of a modern day of someone who owns a business who needs employees. And there's some people that need a job because they haven't figured out a way to produce income for themselves in life, right? So they've become so poor to the point they need to go sell themselves in servitude. This is exactly what we all do when we go get a job. That's what I did when I've worked in the past and worked for other people. And I've had employers treat me horribly in the past, right? And I was, they didn't physically abuse me, but they didn't pay me what I was worth. They changed my wages multiple times. They made it hard or difficult for me to attain the bonuses they promised for me, or they expected me to outright lie in order to be successful in that particular business. So yeah, I, in a sense, because I needed the income and I hadn't figured out how to produce enough on my own, I had to go submit myself to their authority to get a job. That's the modern lingo we're using that we're reading about right here. Verse 46, you may also pass them on as inheritance to your sons after you to receive as a possession. You can use them as permanent slaves. This should be the word servant. This is not literally as a slave, someone that you would oppress or beat. It's not like the modern connotation of slavery. This is the idea of, but it says, but in respect to your countrymen, the sons of Israel, you shall not rule them with severity over one another. Okay, so this is the idea of the foreigner, is specifically the caveat about the foreigner's son, whom you may have brought in as a servant into your household, that you can pass them on to your son and they can use them forever if they wanted to as a permanent servant. We see that again with Abraham and Eliezer. So we see that I think it's in the book of Jubilees, it talks about Eliezer was passed down to Isaac. And so Isaac, he's going out to find a bride for Isaac. And he eventually, after Abraham dies, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's in the book of Jubilees, it talks about Eliezer was then passed on to Isaac. Now, at any point, had Abraham mistreated Eliezer, according to Torah, Eliezer could go free. Just like that. So you either have a good relationship and you're not being abused in any way and you're being compensated for it and being treated well, and you know what I'm saying? Or you get to let go of your contract. Second Kings 4, guys. And we're going to see a scenario where there's someone that's in trouble. Right? What do we read from Leviticus 25:39? If someone in your country becomes so poor that they got to sell themselves to you, what's going to happen? We're going to see a scenario of this in the days of Elisha. 2 Kings chapter 4. So it says, now the wife of one of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, your servant, my husband, is dead. You know that your servant feared the Lord. So this is a woman speaking to the prophet Elisha, saying, my husband died and he feared the Lord. And now his creditor is coming to take my 2 children as his slaves. How can I help you? Asked Elisha. Tell me, what do you have in the house? Okay, guys. Well, for one, here's the situation where the father is out of the picture. Remember what we talked about earlier, where the servant in Exodus 21, I think it's verses 2-5, where it talked about if the servant comes in alone, he can leave alone after he pays his debt off and finishes his years of work. But if he comes in with a family, of course, he leaves with his family. But that means he comes in with his family. So in this situation, the husband's dead. So the creditor is sitting there going, well, I got no one to bring in. Am I going to take the woman and her children? And then he goes, oh, I'll just take his children. I'll just take her children. She doesn't like this. So in my opinion, I think this is actually out of line with Torah. So she's asking for help from the man of God who would know Torah to get her out of this situation. So there could be up for debate. People would say, well, maybe it's not out of line with Torah. Maybe he didn't want the wife, but he needed the children because they could work and the wife couldn't. Possibly, I don't know what the wife looked like, or if she had any physical injuries or who knows what. All I know is that she's running some sort of business here, some sort of restaurant, and she's asking the man of God for a way out of this situation. Even though the situation is not, he doesn't say, well, this situation is unjust. I'm not going to let it happen. Instead, he said he creates a miracle to get her out of the situation and to cover her debt. So verse 2, how can I help you? Asked Elisha. Tell me, what do you have in the house? And she answered him, your servant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil. She's pretty poor, right? So then verse 3 says, Elijah said, go, borrow jars, empty ones from all your neighbors. Do not gather just a few. Then go inside, shut the door behind you, your sons, and pour oil into all these jars, setting the full ones aside. So she left him, and after she shut the door behind her and her sons, they kept bringing jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another." But he replied, "There are no more jars." Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debt. Then you and your sons can live on the remainder." How interesting, right? All right. So if you guys have a question, I don't know if you have a question, I'm going to try to answer questions more than likely that's in the line of, I see someone asking about whether we can go to the gym on Shabbat or not. I'm trying to ask, please try to keep your questions pertinent to what we're actually reviewing today, if possible, so that we don't distract people from the actual content, if possible. All right, so here's a quick question. Jeremiah 15:16 is asking about Sarah. I'm guessing you're asking a question, sister. You didn't put a question mark on it, but you did put it in all caps. So I'm going to assume that you're asking a question. Sarah mistreated Hagar. What type of mistreatment are we talking about? Does it fall into the context of what we just read from Exodus 21? Did Sarah physically abuse and beat Hagar? The angel of the Lord told her to go back and submit to her authority. What was the contention with Sarah and Hagar? Hagar had a child, and the child was playing with Abraham, and there was happiness and joy there. Sarah was upset. It was Sarah's idea to submit Hagar to Abraham to get her pregnant. So then Sarah is upset when the outcome actually happens and Ishmael's born, and there's a sense of family happening, but Sarah's not involved because it's not her child. Sarah mistreated her by being harsh to her, speaking harsh to her, but doesn't say that she physically beat her. Unless I'm wrong, guys. Throw the verse up if I've missed it. It'd be in Genesis. I think it's Genesis. Genesis 19, maybe? No, not 19. Put the verse up if you missed it. But the point is, this is totally different than what we just read from Exodus 21. Hagar was literally considered like a concubine at that point when the consummation of Ishmael was made. So now she has rights of like a wife. It's not about a servant. She's not being physically abused. So it's totally different in my opinion. It's a spat between two women, and one's dealing with extreme jealousy because she can't get pregnant. Exile Strong, I'm not sure what your exact. We can go back to the verse in just a minute. Let me see, 11:48. Yeah, you just asked this question. I'm not sure if you jumped into the live stream late, you're watching 5 minutes ago, and then you're just typing your question now, and it's kind of off in the chronology in the live chat. But that's doesn't seem to be. We can go back to it in just a minute. I'll go back to the verses, but that's not exactly the context of what that chapter said. That's not the instruction. So we'll go back and we'll read it. But in short, the only reason that you would have physical, I addressed this actually, so I'm not sure if you're to that point in the video, but the reason they would have physical punishment for a servant, it's not a slave, it's a servant that you've hired to work for you, is because they've gotten out of line. They're not doing their job, basically, right? They're wasting your time, and they're not making you money to pay off their debt. So they're basically not holding up their end of the bargain for why they're there. And yeah, it's not justified if he dies. So I'm not sure where you're getting that particular wording of that question. Let me just give me a minute. We'll try to go back to that in just a second. So here in 2 Kings 4, 5, and 7, so she left him, and after she so she gets all the oil from Elisha, providing the miracle for her. This is very similar to what we see, the type of miracle that Jesus does, where he multiplies the fish and the bread, to where suddenly there's an abundance that's miraculously happening as this story unfolds in real time while she's filling these jars with oil. The oil doesn't run out, and she can pay off her debt, so that she's circumventing, if you will, this Torah concept of her having to work off her debt to her creditor. So this is a beautiful concept of the Father has something in place, but he even provides a miracle for this lady through the prophet Elisha, so that she doesn't even have to do the process of paying off a creditor according to Torah as he outlines. So like, that's how compassionate and merciful he is, specifically for a woman and her children. Think about the love and care and consideration the father has for a woman in that. He already provided an actual legal way for her to take care of that debt. And she has two capable children that are probably going to go and take care of that debt. But that would cause her a heartache. So God provides a literal miracle of finances so that she doesn't have to do that. We serve an amazingly loving, compassionate Father. Amazing. Always looking to take care of his daughters. Okay. Matthew 18, same concept that we're talking about with this idea of selling a person because of debts, right? Having to work off your debt because of something. And this is a quick mention. I'm not going to go into the whole parable, but I'm adding to the examples to show you how the practical application of this would have happened because of Torah. So Yeshua is telling a parable all built upon Torah. In Matthew 18, 23 to 25, he says, because of this, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlements, a debtor was brought to him owing 10,000 talents. Since the man was unable to pay, the master ordered that he be sold to pay his debt, along with his wife and children and everything he owned. So this is an example of Torah being implemented, like we saw from Exodus 21. If the man who's in debt comes in with his family, then his whole family is under the control, if you will, of the debtor. But that was the responsibility of having a family back then. This is why, it was a big deal to not, how any debt that a man might acquire in his life would affect his wife and children. So this is just harsh realities. So let's go on to Deuteronomy 22 as well. Now we're kind of going back a little bit to the beginning of Exodus 21, verse 7, where it talked about in the mix of Exodus 21, where it's mixing in different types of rules for servants who are in debt. It also goes into the idea of taking on a wife, as the Septuagint called it, a domestic, and she does not have the same circumstances as the female servants to that person. So she's actually being a wife that he's taken on, and she has certain rights. If there's displeasure between that, there's no chemistry there, and there's displeasure there, and he has to pay a price for her to basically send her back to her father. He can't just, leave her alone. He can't mistreat her and keep her, basically. He can't deny her companionship and love and respect or food and clothing or whatever, all the other things that were mentioned in Exodus 21. He can't deny her all that stuff and still keep her. He has to provide for her, love her, and care for her. It's all built into the Torah. Verse 22, 13 through 17 expounds upon this a little bit. It says, suppose a man marries a woman, has relations with her, and comes to hate her, and then accuses her of shameful conduct and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman and had relations with her, but I discovered she was not a virgin. Then the young woman's father and mother shall bring the proof of her virginity to the city elders at the gate and say to the elders, I gave my daughter in marriage to this man, but he has come to hate her. And now he has accused her of shameful conduct, saying, I discovered that your daughter was not a virgin, but here's the proof of her virginity. And they shall spread out the cloth before the city elders. Guys, don't ask. I have no clue what that cloth is or what that looks like or what that test involves. So I apologize. I don't ask. Let me see here. Then the elders of the city shall take the man and punish him. They are also to fine him 100 shekels of silver and give them to the young woman's father, because this man has given a virgin of Israel a bad name, and she shall remain his wife. He must not divorce her as long as he lives. If, however, this accusation is true and no proof of the young woman's virginity can be found, she shall be brought to the door of the father's house, and there the men of the city will stone her to death. For she has committed an outrage in Israel by being promiscuous in her father's house. So you must purge the evil from among you. And that was the last part of that. So this idea is that you can't just slander a woman. You can't just, make up something about her and claim that she was, something that she wasn't. You can't say that she was promiscuous before marriage if she wasn't, right? You can't just claim that as a reason to discard her. So just as you add these ideas with Exodus 21, you have a full encompassing protection for a woman according to the Father's law. Now, do all cultures and all people follow this perfectly? No, people mess up and they make mistakes. Specifically with these interactions here where the heart's involved and there's heated emotions and failed expectations, people are very disappointed. They feel rejected and hurt. People are going to make mistakes in how they apply this. It's not always done perfectly. This supposedly back in the day in the nation of Israel is why you'd have a judge, an elder or a Levite who would know the law, who would be wise in the law and be able to preside over these matters to make sure that if the people can't love each other, right? Because that's kind of the basis, right? Love your neighbors, you love yourself. So obviously your wife is supposed to be a part of you. If you can't love that person, if the wife can't love the husband, if there's enmity that has been created, which is why this beginning of this in Deuteronomy 12:13 says he comes to hate her. So he's consummated the marriage, but now there's bad blood between them because they're not getting along. He can't just mistreat her. And he definitely can't slander her to the point of shaming her in public. As we read from Exodus 21, he has to pay the price for her redemption. So then she can be free to go back to her family and find another suitor, and do it without shame, and do it without being looked upon as someone who's not able to marry again. So this is a way to protect the woman in all regards. You can't just abuse a woman by taking advantage of her, or even if not, I'm kind of assuming a bad mentality on the man's part. He maybe didn't want to take advantage of her. Maybe there's just really bad chemistry, or they both really didn't know how to behave with one another, and he's trying to get rid of her, right? Because he doesn't know how to handle her. Or maybe she's perfect. Maybe she's a wonderful person. He just has his own problems. He doesn't know how to treat her with love. He's still learning to mature as a man. Then he still can't make up things about her. He still can't treat her harshly. He still can't deny her marital rights or provisions as a wife. He has to treat her with love, or he has to let her go and be free and pay the price monetarily for it. So I just want to kind of stress this idea that the women were supposed to be protected. That was the whole idea. It's always the idea. I just didn't want people thrown out for no reason, and definitely didn't want people slandered for no reason. That was a big deal, right? Okay, guys. Let me see here. Let me see if I can go back real quick. I think the gentleman had that question. He was asking, what was he asking about? Shannon Mackey, what does it mean, go and shut the door behind you? I honestly don't know in that specific passage about why she had to shut the door first before she started, this miracle started happening with all the people bringing the jars and filling all the jars with the extra oil. I'm not sure exactly what the significance is of why it kept mentioning about shutting the door. So. Daniel Atoya, I'm not sure the context of what you're asking that specifically. I apologize. If you could reword your question a little more clear. One succinct, well-worded question. I apologize. I'm not understanding what you're asking. Let me see here. What was that question? Okay, there it is. He was asking about, so that we covered this. Let me go back to this real quick in my notes. Okay. So Exile Strong, you had asked about what I think what you're asking about is Exodus 21:20. The man strikes his maidservant, or his manservant or maidservant with a rod. The servant dies by his hand. He shall surely be punished. However, if the servant gets up after a day or two, the owner shall not be punished, since his servant is his property. So your question seems to be a little malformed, and that's why I would just say go back and reread this verse, because I think you read the opposite of what the verse actually says. If someone strikes his employee that's working for him and he dies, then yeah, the man who struck him will be punished. But if he's punishing him so that he gets up after 2 days, a day or two, that means he's okay. And this is why it also says in the previous verse, as we reviewed right here, the one who struck, look at verse 19, because remember it's right before 20. The one who struck him shall go unpunished, as long as the other can get up and walk around outside with his staff. Nevertheless, he must compensate the man for his lost work. Now, this is a little bit different circumstance than a servant who works for him. This is someone two men that are quarreling. But the same principle applies, okay? So the idea in verse 20 that the servant who's been punished for being a bad worker, sorry, hit the button real quick. If he's able to get up after 2 days, that means he's not hurt physically. He's okay. Basically, he received some shame. He received some lashes. He's okay. Hopefully he's going to stop. He's going to make him a better worker at this point. He's going to actually hold up his end of the contract at this point. If he's literally been abused to the point of being killed, it's not okay for anybody. Both, obviously, the man's dead, but then the person that abused him, he's going to be punished according to the judges. It's going to be a bad, bad deal. Okay. So you can't just mistreat someone that's working for you. So hopefully that's a decent explanation to better explain that for you. All right, guys, let's go to Exodus 22. That we're going to kind of go quickly through some of these latter chapters because the first chapter is massive. It's just a massive chapter of application of the Father's word. Actually, I got one last companion I want to add here. Isaiah 1:16-17. Wash and cleanse yourselves. Remove evil deeds from my sight. Stop doing evil. Learn to do right. Seek justice and correct the oppressor. Defend the fatherless and plead the case of the widow. This is Isaiah explaining what justice is. This is what we just read from Exodus 21. What we saw the Father do in 2 Kings chapter 4 through the miracle with Elisha and the woman in the jars of oil. She was a widow. Her children were fatherless. And the Heavenly Father came through with a miracle to take care of her. In a sense, he pleaded her case. He did it in a much better miraculous way than just settling a debt. With the debtor, he provided for the debt to be completely wiped away. How beautiful of a Heavenly Father that do we have. Also in James 1:27, the Father is telling us through the Apostle James, pure and undefiled religion before our God and his Father is this, to care for orphans and the widows in their distress. That's exactly what happened in 2 Kings 4, built upon the Torah that was being enacted in Exodus 21, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So this is this constant urging by the Father to treat women and children with respect. And in his Torah, he's built in a system that would provide for that. Okay, so let's keep going here. Exodus 22, 1-5. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters or sells it, he must repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is caught breaking in and is beaten to death, no one shall be guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, there is guilt for his bloodshed. A thief must make full restitution if he has nothing, if he himself should be sold for his theft. If what was stolen is actually found alive in his possession, whether ox or donkey or sheep, he must pay back double. If a man gazes his livestock in a field or vineyard and allows them to stray so that they graze in someone else's field, he must make restitution from the best of his own field or vineyard. If a fire breaks out and spreads to the thorn bushes so that it consumes stacks or standing grain, or the whole field, the one who started the fire must make full restitution. If a man gives his neighbor money or goods for safekeeping, they are stolen from the neighbor's house. The thief, if caught, must pay back double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house must appear before the judges to determine whether he has taken his neighbor's property. In all cases of illegal possession of an ox, a donkey, a sheep, a garment, or any lost item that someone claims, this is mine, both parties shall bring their case before the judges. The one whom the judges finds guilty must pay back double to his neighbor. If a man gives a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any other animal to be cared for by his neighbor, but it dies, or is injured, or is stolen while no one is watching, an oath before the Lord shall be made between the parties to determine whether or not the man has taken his neighbor's property. The owner must accept the oath and require no restitution. But if the animal was actually stolen from the neighbor, he must make restitution to the owner. If the animal was torn to pieces, he shall bring it as evidence. He need not make restitution for the torn carcass. How interesting, guys. We're going to go over how this Torah is actually abused in Genesis 37 here in just a minute. If a man borrows an animal from his neighbor and is injured or dies while its owner is not present, he must make full restitution. If the owner was present, no restitution is required. If the animal was rented, the fee covers the loss. If a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged in marriage and sleeps with her, he must pay the full dowry for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, the man still must pay an amount comparable to the bridal price of a virgin. This goes back to what we just read from Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 22. Also, you must not allow a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal must be surely put to death. This is occultic practices that they would be doing in the nations surrounding them, also the nations of Egypt, where they would do all types of horrific things with men, women, and animals during some of these occult rituals. And if anyone sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone, he must be set apart for destruction. You must not exploit or oppress a foreign resident, for you yourselves were foreigners in the land of Egypt. So I love that verse 21. It just kind of throws onto that, even though it seems out of context to some of the other passages. It's a whole bunch of instructions mixed together. He just has to go back and remind you again of all the previous Exodus 21 that we just read about how you're to treat servants and interact with foreigners the same way you would the countrymen of your own, that you are not to exploit or oppress them. That's two different concepts. You can exploit someone without oppressing them. That's taking advantage of. I've been exploited before working for people in business. So the oppressing part is submitting them to a slave labor that denies them their rights, that abuses their, the rights that are outlined for them in the Torah. So this is the Father trying to make sure people understand that there is one law for all of Egypt, or excuse me, there's one law for all of Israel, and it's to treat people according to the Torah. Verse 22 says, "You must not mistreat any widow or orphan." There it is again, like we just read from Isaiah 1 and also James 1:27. It's also in Micah 6:8. It's also, what Yeshua is referring to when he talks about keeping the weightier matters of the law, when he's reprimanding the Pharisees in Matthew 23. It is what we just read from Exodus 21, right? How to take care of the women and children. "And if you do mistreat them and they cry out to me in the distress, I will surely hear their cry. My anger will be kindled. I will kill you with the sword, and then your wives will become widows and your children will be fatherless." So this is basically putting into men, in the mind of men, if you want to mistreat a woman or her children, and you have women and children, well, suddenly you're going to put your family in their position. So it's trying to, it's not only a harsh, strict warning, admonition of punishment, but it would put in the mind of a man, all right, if I'm taking and exploiting in this situation, taking advantage of this woman or a child who doesn't have a husband to protect them or defend them, I'm gonna die, and then my family is going to be in their spot with no one to protect or defend them. Who's going to mistreat them? So hopefully it brings an awareness to change your behavior and your character. Hopefully. Verse 24, "My anger will be kindled. I will kill you with the sword. Then your wives will become widows and your children will be fatherless. If you lend money to one of my people among you who's poor, you must not act as a creditor to him. You are not to charge him interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as collateral, return it to him by sunset." Because this is the interest and this is the, the collateral, not the interest, but the collateral would be about you, because you engaged in a loan of some sort. So just in case people in the audience are watching and don't know what the word collateral means, because his cloak is his only covering he has for his body. What else will he sleep in? "And if he cries out to me, I will hear, for I'm compassionate. You must not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people." So guys, verse 28, we're going to address verse 28 here in a minute. And guys, stick with us, because I think you're going to be, I know we're an hour in and I'm only on chapter 22, but guys, verse 28 is fascinating. When I did not see this until I was doing this study and I was comparing with the Septuagint. It is fascinating, guys. All right, so verse 29, "You must not hold back offerings from your granaries or vats. You are to give me the firstborn of your sons. You shall do likewise with your cattle and your sheep. Let them stay with their mothers for 7 days. But on the 8th day, you are to give them to me. You are to be my holy people. You must not eat the meat of the mauled animal found in the field. You are to throw it to the dogs." All right, so we're not going to focus a lot on those two passages. There's two concepts in Exodus 22 that I want to focus on with companion passages. Guys, the call-in stream, the call-in link, is streaming on the ticker at the bottom of the screen right now. So if you see that, you're welcome to call in at this time. Since I finished chapter 22, I'm going to go over some of the companion passages. You're welcome to call in, and we can bring your question in the appropriate time as I review these companion passages. Okay, so now's the time to do that if you want. So let's go back to what we're looking at here. I'm sorry. Let's go to our Genesis 37 companion passage here, where we're talking about the Torah that we just read from Exodus 22 about an animal and bringing that's been mauled, and you would bring evidence of that. If this is actually what happens with the mistreatment of Joseph by his brothers. So this is why they would take his coat, they would dip it in blood. It was evidence to show that he'd been killed, and the assumption they're trying to draw is based off of the idea that we read back in here. So let me go back real quick and let me read it again so people can have it fresh in their brain. All right, so it's going to be in verse 12. But let me see here. Let's start in verse 11. An oath before the Lord shall be made between the two parties to determine whether or not the man has taken his neighbor's property. The owner must accept the oath and require no restitution. But if the animal was actually stolen from the neighbor, he must make restitution to the owner. If the animal was torn to pieces, he shall bring it as evidence. He need not make restitution for the torn carcass. So, yes, this is talking about an animal. I understand that. But Joseph is the possession of Jacob. the older brothers of Joseph, they take to try to show evidence of this is something that they would have done. This is a practice they're perverting from the Torah, basically, to try to convince their father that Joseph was dead. I just thought it was interesting that they instead of bringing this animal that was torn and bringing evidence of it, they're going to physically tear and wipe animal's blood on this coat of Joseph's in order to try to convince their father. So this would be a concept that would strike some sort of authoritative motion, if I could put it like that, would be convincing in the fact that this was a play off of a Torah command that they would have already been aware of, if I could put it like that. Genesis 37, 29 through 33, Reuben returned to the pit, saw that Joseph was not there. He tore his clothes. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy's gone. What am I going to do?" Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a young goat, dipped the robe in his blood. They sent the robe of many colors to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it's your son's robe or not." His father recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. A vicious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son many days. All of his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will go down to Shul mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. I also think, just as a quick caveat, I think this is fascinating that Reuben is the one that's so upset that he tears his clothes. This is a common practice, just like Jacob became upset and tore his clothes. Reuben is upset because of what his brothers had done, because he felt responsible. We talked about this in these Torah portions from the Testament of 12 patriarchs, from the Testament of Reuben, and also it's actually in Genesis, I think, chapter 43, where when the sons of Jacob go to Israel to buy food and they're speaking in the presence of Joseph and don't know it's Joseph, Reuben is the one who says, "Did I not tell you guys not to harm the boy? All this is happening to us because of what we did." He's basically saying we've been cursed for these 20 years and all these bad things are happening to us. And now this bad stuff has happened to us because of what we did to Joseph. And like, he didn't realize Joseph is literally right there listening to him as a grown man. But it's the heart of Reuben that Joseph is getting to see in that moment, that he's the one. But at the same time, these boys are all trained in Torah. That doesn't mean they're following it perfectly. This is Romans chapter 7, right? What you want to do, you don't always do. What you don't want to do, sometimes you find yourself doing it. This is the struggle with the sin, right? The sin flesh that we try to get better at as we discipleship. So even though the boys of Jacob were supposed to know the Torah and do the Torah, they didn't always follow it perfectly. And here's one example where, in my opinion, they're actually taking a concept from Torah and twisting it in order to bring it forth as evidence to Joseph's father Jacob, and Jacob comes to his own conclusions naturally. So I thought that was a really interesting concept. So Genesis 43, let's look at it real quick. It says, "They replied, the man questioned us in detail about ourselves and our families. Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?" And we answered him accordingly. "How could we possibly know what he would say? Bring your brother here." And Judah said to his father Israel, "Send the boy with me. We will go at once so that we may live and not die, neither we nor you nor our children. I will guarantee his safety. You may hold me personally responsible. If I do not bring him back and set him before you, then I may bear the guilt before you all my life. If we had not delayed, we could have come and gone twice by now." So I inserted this in here because this is Judah talking to Jacob, going back. They're wanting to go back a second time to get Simeon, to take the food, to take the money back, to actually get more food. It's been a year at this point, and he's actually putting up for surety his own two sons to make sure that they bring Benjamin back with them, because that's the caveat to go back a second time and get Simeon back. They had to bring Benjamin with them. And so I thought this was fascinating because that was similar to what we read in the Torah. Let me go back to it real quick concerning the idea of why Judah would be offering this as far as collateral, if you will, because it was a part of his guarantee to protect Benjamin. I can't remember which verse I was playing it off of. Yeah, it's actually verse 14 and 15. "If a man borrows an animal from his neighbor and is injured or dies while his owner is not present, he must make full restitution. If the owner was present, no restitution is required. If the animal was rented, the fee covers the loss." So verse 14 is an idea of Judah is offering up his two sons in some sort of surety to say, "Hey, let us take Benjamin. Let us go get more food. Let us go get Simeon. I'll bring Benjamin back. I promise to you." It's based off the same principle here, that he has to make full restitution, just like Exodus 22:14 will talk about, because now he's becoming fully responsible for someone else's child. So this is just a Torah principle we're seeing Judah implore here upon Jacob to overcome Jacob's fear. Okay, guys, let's go back to it real quick. John chapter 10, this is where it gets fascinating. We're going to look at Exodus 22:28 in the Septuagint, and I think you guys are going to be really excited to see what we're talking about. Remember when Jesus said, is it not written in your law that I've said you are gods? And he called them gods to whom the word of the God came, and the scripture cannot be broken. Then what about the one whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world? How then can you accuse me of blasphemy for stating that I'm the Son of God? How interesting. Okay. So this is a moment where a lot of people are asking, where in the Old Testament is it written that we're gods? And a lot of people like to point to Psalm 82. I've never agreed with that interpretation. And I've got to be honest, I thought, oh, it could be fitting, but the way that it's described in Psalm 82, verse 1-7, about the foundations of the earth being broken up and everything, and just I've never found that specific psalm and the context therein to be speaking about the leaders of Israel, if you will. Okay, I always thought it was speaking more to rebellious angels from before the flood as a prophetic style psalm, which would be why the foundations of earth are broken up, which would have caused the flood, which is what Enoch 85 explains as well. But it's the use of the word gods here that I want to point out. And what Yeshua is using to say, is it not written in your law? Well, okay, is Psalms always considered part of the law? Some people would say yes. Okay, and I'm not saying that it's not. I'm saying I think I found a much more clear, direct correlation. And it's actually Exodus 22:28. So he says, if he called them gods to whom the word of God came, so that would disqualify Psalm 82 from this extra explanation Yeshua has given the Pharisees here to explain why he's using this word God in the sense of, is it not written in your law? That's one qualifier right there. And two, I've said you are gods. Where does it say that in the Torah? Where does it say that in Genesis through Deuteronomy anywhere? Let's look. Where is Exodus 22 happening? Exodus 22 is actually happening on Mount Sinai with Moses and the elders receiving instruction at the base of the mountain before they actually, before Moses goes up for 40 days and 40 nights by himself on the top of the mountain. So this is very interesting to me. That is the timing of this is to whom the word of God came in this moment. And so let me go back to Exodus 22:28 and put it on screen for you. We'll actually go look at the Septuagint real quick so you can see what I'm saying. Exodus 22:28. And it says, you shall not revile the gods nor speak ill of the ruler of your people. So this is where many of you, if you've seen me do some of my debates, I think I did a debate with a gentleman from Messiah Matters, and the majority of my conversation with him during that hour-long discussion was me saying, what does the word God mean? Over and over, I'd ask him, what does the word God mean? And people don't know. They think it only means the Almighty or Jesus in a Trinitarian fashion. But it's a word that has multiple uses. It's the word Elohim in the Hebrew, and it can mean the Almighty, yes, and it can refer to anyone that's in rulership, which also would apply to the Son of God. It also could apply to celestial beings like an angel, because they're considered rulers according to God. They're a high priesthood over mankind, and Yeshua is now given a priesthood over them, according to Hebrews 1. So the word God has multiple uses. You have to look at the context. And sometimes the translators do really poor with translating it because they'll sometimes capitalize it wrongly when they shouldn't, right? Because the context doesn't allow for it, because it's clearly talking about human rulers or angelic rulers. So this is where, in a moment right here in Exodus 22:28, it's speaking about the rulers of Israel. That's why Yeshua would say to them, is it not written in the law that I've called you gods, to whom the word of the Lord came? What's happening in Exodus 22? We're going to read in Exodus 24 here in a minute. The elders of Israel, along with Moses and Aaron and Caleb and Hur and all those guys, they go up to the mountain and they receive the instructions in full totality from the angels, specifically from the angel of Jubilees, the ones that's writing the book of Jubilees. This is the word of the Lord coming for explanation. I'm going to go over those verses later after we read chapter 24, explaining to the elders of Israel, which are the class of rulers of the people. This is why it's not speaking about two different groups in this verse you have on screen here, guys. This is a common Hebrew way of writing where it says something that expounds upon the same topic with further explanation in the same sentence. You shall not revile the rulers. That's a Hebrew word, Elohim, that can be applied to the rulers of your people. You shall not revile the gods, nor speak ill of the ruler of your people. So just in case you were confused on what gods is talking about, in case you suddenly thought this is somehow preaching idolatry, no, it expounds to explain to you it's talking about the rulers of your people. That's why Yeshua is telling us in John, or is reprimanding the Pharisees in John 10, is it not written in your law, I've said you're gods. I've said you are rulers. If he called them rulers to whom the word of the Lord came, that's literally Moses, Aaron, all the 70 elders that went up with him on the mountain to receive the word. The word of the Lord came to them through the angels. Hopefully that helps. It was encouraging to me. And because this is something I had struggled with for a long time. I've been like, man, is that Psalm 82 or is it just a completely missing passage? No, it's in there. It's just translated poorly from the Masoretic. So the Septuagint gives you a much better understanding of why Yeshua was saying that, which is par for the course. There's many things that Yeshua is quoting from the Septuagint that's not in the Masoretic, which this is Torah apologetics. Judaism, modern day proponents of Judaism, anti-missionaries will take some of Yeshua's words and they'll go to the Masoretic text and they'll say, see, it's not in there. Well, no, it's not, because it's in the Septuagint, not the Masoretic. You're looking at the wrong translation. Jesus wasn't reading from the Masoretic. He was quoting from a version of the Septuagint they would have the most common, prominent language of the day, which is Greek. Yes. There was also Aramaic and versions of Hebrew back then as well. But the most common language of the day that the scriptures were read in the first century AD was Greek. So this is why you have Jesus quoting things directly found in the Greek Septuagint, just like other passages in the New Testament that you don't find in the Masoretic. So this is it's a wonderful blessing to us to have as a resource to compare and contrast in our day with the Septuagint. All right, guys, hopefully that was encouraging to you. Exodus 23. No one called in, so I'm going to jump into Exodus 23. You shall not spread a false report. Do not join the wicked by being a malicious witness. You shall not follow the crowd in wrongdoing. When you testify in a lawsuit, do not prefer justice by siding with the crowd. Boy, I would love Congress to read that law and understand that law. And do not show favoritism to a poor man in his lawsuit. If you encounter your enemy's stray ox or donkey, you must return it to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you fallen under its load, do not leave it there. You must help him with it. You shall not deny justice to the poor in their lawsuits. Stay far away from a false accusation. Do not kill the innocent or the just, for I will not acquit the guilty. Guys, I lovingly want to, for everyone that may be watching this, who's really struggling with all the negative, out of context, poorly understood attacks that people are making against the Apostle Paul, I want to lovingly remind you of Exodus 23:7. Stay far away from false accusation. Do not kill the innocent or the just, for I will not acquit the guilty. So this is something that the Father does not like, condemning the just or acquitting the guilty or killing the innocent, right? So these ideas of justice, now they can be perverted. And I've done multiple videos on my channel about Paul, that he's an apostle. He's accepted by the other apostles. He's teaching the Torah and the resurrection and all of his letters everywhere. And I've showed that with so many multiple videos. I still see people that refuse to look at the evidence and just have a predisposition of hatred towards that specific person, which causes a ton of theological issues and problems and leads a lot of people into a lot of wonky thoughts and unnecessary suspicion of the scriptures. And as a result, you're condemning the just. And I want to be very lovingly, admonishing to anyone that may be watching right now that struggles. If you struggle with Paul, that's okay. Just set it aside until you know the Old Testament a little bit better, and then come back to Paul's letters. Okay? This would be my best encouragement for that. Verse 8, do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds those who see and twists the words of the righteous. Do not oppress a foreign resident, since you yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. For 6 years you are to sow your land and gather its produce, but in the 7th year you must let it rest and life follow, so that the poor among your people may eat from the field, and the wild animals may consume what they leave. Do the same with your vineyard and olive grove. For 6 days you are to do your work, but on the 7th day you must cease, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your maidservant may be refreshed, as well as the foreign resident. Pay close attention to everything I've said to you. You must not invoke the names of other gods. They must not be heard on your lips. 3 times a year, you're to celebrate a feast to me. You're to keep the feast of unleavened bread as I commanded you. At the appointed time in the month of Abib, you are to eat unleavened bread for 7 days, because that was the month you came out of Egypt. No one may appear before me empty-handed. You also are to keep the field. You also are to keep the feast of the harvest with the first fruits of the produce from what you sow in the field, and keep the feast of ingathering at the end of the year when you gather your produce from the field. 3 times a year, all your males are to appear before the Lord God. You must not offer the blood of my sacrifices with anything leavened, nor may the fat of my feast remain until morning. Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. You must not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Behold, I'm sending you an angel before you to protect you along the way and to bring you to the place I prepared. Pay attention to him, listen to his voice, do not defy him, for he will not forgive rebellion since my name is in him. Guys, I just want to lovingly stop and look at verse 20 again. It says, behold, I'm sending an angel, a messenger, before you to protect you along the way, to bring you to the place I prepared. I didn't provide this companion passage because I had so many already, and I had so many things I'm trying to point out with so much meat in the first, Exodus 21, 22. I'm not going to be able to spend a lot of time this portion on these particular instructions. Thankfully, we're going to review these instructions again, both in Numbers and Deuteronomy. But guys, he sent an angel. He did not send a pre-incarnate Yeshua. He sent an angel, and that angel announces himself, explains himself, and we have it reiterated in Psalms, but the whole book of Jubilees is the angel announcing and explaining himself, that he's the one with Moses for 40 days and 40 nights on the mountaintop, the one that was sent to go before them in the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. It is an angel of God. It's considered an angel of the presence, and this is specifically an angel that we're told in the book of Jubilees is a part of the angelic, the angelic classes, an angel of the presence. He's a high-ranking angel that has the authority. In fact, the Septuagint in verse 21, at the end of verse 21, where it says, since my name is in him, in the Septuagint it says, since my name is on him. This is the idea of agency, that an angel would have authority to go and exert the power of the Father, to guide the people, to teach the people. I'm sorry, guys. I know a lot of people love to claim this is a pre-incarnate Yeshua. This is literally an angel announces himself. The entire book of Jubilees explains this in greater detail. If these passages are not enough for you, I think the passages are very clear. A lot of people don't. So, all right, guys, we have someone trying to call in. Please be patient. I'm almost done with the chapter, and I'll be glad to take your question. Verse 23, for my angel will go before you, will bring you to the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites. I will annihilate them. You must not bow down to their gods or serve them or follow their practices. Instead, you are to demolish them and smash their sacred stones to pieces. So you shall serve the Lord your God, who will bless your bread and your water, and I will take away your sicknesses from among you. No woman in your land will miscarry or be barren. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all your enemies turn and run. I will send the hornet before you to drive the Hivites and the Canaanites and the Hittites out of your way. I will not drive them out before you in a single year. Otherwise, the land would become desolate and wild animals would multiply against you. Little by little, I'll drive them out ahead of you until you become fruitful and possess the land. And I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the desert to the Euphrates. For I will gather the inhabitants into your land, and I will drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. You must not remain in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. And of course, verse 31, guys, this is the same land promised to you, Abraham, in Genesis 15. So it's the land of promise, the land of covenant. It's the same land where the New Jerusalem is going to set down. The kingdom is going to come and sit down right there. So we have a caller that is called in. All right. It says that it won't let me bring you in, brother or sister. It says you need to connect your device. So you might want to try again. Try to call in again if you're listening, okay? You have to give permission to StreamYard to accept your mic and your camera phone so that it opens up so you can talk to me. Just try to call back in, okay? I'm going to see if there's any questions in the chat. Okay, Sean M is asking, is it mentioned in any writings where angels live or reside in the Shamayim. The word Shamayim, guys, is the Hebrew word for heaven. So in Genesis 1, and in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That word is Shamayim in the Hebrew. Is it mentioned they eat manna? Well, it is in Psalms. We talked about they ate the bread of angels. That's literally what the psalmist refers to as manna, was the bread of angels. And whereas you're asking, does it mention in any writings that angels live or reside in the heaven? Well, yes, that's where they come from. All the scriptures talk about that. There's too many for me to quote. Like that is where they live, in the heaven. There's multiple layers of the heaven. This is what we've talked about in previous episodes. Deuteronomy 10:14 references that concept as well, where it talks about the Most High is at the highest heaven. The Psalms also refer to the highest heaven in multiple places. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, 1 through 3, Paul refers to the third level of the firmament of the heaven, where the New Jerusalem is currently presides. The other books, Testament of 12 Patriarchs, Apocalypse of Abraham, even some of the writings of the early church fathers like Irenaeus, they all talk about the firmament having 7 different levels, 7 different places. And Testament of 12 Patriarchs, Testament of Levi, which was a book found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, both in Aramaic and Latin, I believe. They basically, it describes multiple layers of the firmament where angels are living and existing. There's multiple temples where they're doing priestly duties according to their hierarchy. This is how, chapter, I think it's First Enoch, chapter 30, First Enoch, chapter 42, verse 1 through 2, talks about how the kingdom of heaven is divided. This is one of the things that Enoch got to see, how it was literally broken up according to different types of hierarchy of angels. And this is what Yeshua is inferring in Matthew 5, verse 19 and 20, about those who keep the Torah and do the Torah will be called great in heaven. Those who don't will be called least in heaven. This is where you have multiple levels of the firmament above us, and the angels are stationed in multiple different levels. And supposedly in one of the lower levels is the armies of God, the actual group of angels that come down with Yeshua during the day of the Lord to battle with him. And above him are different classes of other types of angels that have different job duties. And of course, the archangels, the ones that are mentioned in Enoch chapter 20, also referenced in the Testament of Levi. There are specific archangels that are like the highest priesthood within their priesthood class, and they minister at the top level where the Father is. This is the same. These would be the cherubim, seraphim, and ophanim that we see mentioned in this fiery house in the book of First Enoch. That's also mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 1, chapter 8, and chapter 10, where it's there. Yeah, angels are all over the place in the multiple levels of heaven above. But they eat more than just bread. Good news. They also make sacrifices because they make meals in fellowship and companionship with the Father according to the Torah. And as priests, they eat of the meals, just as the Torah expounds. So they eat lots of different foods. They bring in their first fruits. They have land. They have houses, according to First Enoch. That means they have crops. It's a real tangible place, guys. It's a real tangible place with real food, real air, real water. That's how we get to exist and live in the Father's house with him forever. It's not a ghost world. It's a real tangible place. Sister Payne is asking, why do the angels in heaven perform sacrifices? Because that is the Torah. They do the Torah in heaven. Guys, you have to try to remember the idea of a sacrifice is not just something for sin atonement. There's multiple sacrifices listed in the Torah for thanksgiving, for praise, first fruits, like we just read about previously. In Exodus 23, expressing to bring in your first fruits. The angels do that as well. The book of Jubilees expounds to us that the first fruit festival of Shavuot has been kept in heaven by the angels since the beginning of creation. This means they have to have produce to bring to the Father. This means someone's growing it. This means they have real land. They have real water. They have real soil of some sort. It's a real world. You know what I'm saying? So all the instructions for living that the Father gave mankind on our realm of existence, the plane of the earth, they have on their own realms of existence the same instructions. The Father's not duplicitous. He doesn't have this weird double standard of like, all right, these guys do something different than these guys. Like the angels are a part of Israel, the nationhood, the spiritual Israel. They're a part of us. They're our brethren. They abide by the same behavior of the Father, which means all these instructions you're reading in Torah, you're literally reading the descriptions of heaven. we're going over the laws of heaven, the equity of heaven, the justice of heaven. We're going over the first fruits festivals and feasts, the agricultural practices of not sowing in the seventh year and allowing the land to be fallow, and allow, you know what I'm saying? We're reading about all the practices that are kept in heaven that we read about in the Torah for men to practice upon the earth. So it's so funny. People will say, "Oh man, I love it when you do episodes on heaven." And I'm like, I've done a ton of them. They're called Kingdom portions. We did like 70 episodes where we went over all the different the scriptures that describe the Father's behavior and how he lives given to mankind to practice. That means we're seeing exactly how the Father lives in heaven. We're seeing about how all the angels interact with each other in heaven. We're reading about heaven right now, guys. People don't realize that. Hopefully it's an encouragement to you, sister. They do it because it's part of a Torah and they're part of a priesthood is the shortest, simplest answer. Funky Monkey Painting is asking, what's the role of the Holy Spirit? And do you have a video on this? I do not have a specific video on the role of the Holy Spirit other than being it's the animating power of the Father that flows through the Father and also the Son to create life, to bring healing, to bring inspiration, to bring messages of encouragement. It is what animates all things in all of creation. There is no scripture that tells us it has its own body with its own separate name, or that it's standing at the right or the left of the Father in heaven. That's a Catholic idea of a Trinitarianism. No scripture says that anywhere. So that's it's just the animating power of God that goes into all of creation. It's called the Spirit of life, Spirit of the breath of the Almighty. Sometimes, like in Genesis 2:7. And we see here. Yes, exactly, Jane. On earth as it is in heaven. This is why Yeshua prays this. He asked us to pray this. May his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. May the Father's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We're practicing the behavior of heaven by trying to learn and do the Torah. This is why the enemy hates it so bad. They don't want us to know this. They don't want us to do this. They want to confuse us as much as possible. We're literally practicing the behavior of the Father. I can't put it in any simpler terms. And if the Father brings me a better way to explain this in the future, may it be. But at this point in my life, I can't explain it in any simpler terms to get people away from the confusing language of church that they've heard all their life. Righteousness is simply you doing the behavior of the Father. You're literally practicing the behavior of heaven as you do his words instructed to us that he calls righteousness, right? His instructions for living. This is how he said, look, I want you to behave like this. Everything will go good for you if you do this. Why? Because it's his behavior. It's literally what he's doing. He's not hypocritical. He's doing exactly what he tells us is good. He's already doing it. He's got proof of concept in heaven. Yeah, I just hope to encourage you guys. All right, guys. This question comes up. I need to figure out a way. Exile Strong, I appreciate your question. What I'm about to say, this is not, in any kind of weird, this is not any kind of weird negativity towards you. This is just something as someone that has made videos for 3 years and has tried to talk about this, many different videos, we get a lot of new people that just find the channel and they've never heard this idea before. They come straight out of the church and like, oh, what in the world? This guy's saying there's animals in heaven. They're doing their priesthood and they're doing temples and sacrifices. And I'm like, yes, it's literally Hebrews chapter 8, 1-5. Preachers don't preach on it. Churches don't understand it, apparently, or they refuse to understand it. I've had videos where I've literally gone over it with other pastors and they stare at me blank-faced. And they're like, are you saying that there's sacrifices in heaven? And I'm like, no, I'm reading the verse to you from Hebrews chapter 8, 1-5 that tells you that. And they're just looking at me like, but wait, what? And it's a lot of cognitive dissonance with this because we've been told that sacrifices was an unnecessary thing, that Yeshua did away with all that, but that is a lie. Sacrifices literally just having a barbecue fellowship meal with your Father. We're going to eat in heaven. Matthew 22, the wedding supper of the Lamb happens in heaven, in the kingdom of heaven, in the New Jerusalem. The glorified resurrected saints are sitting down for a meal with Yeshua. And it says in Matthew 22, 1-4, the fattened oxen and lambs have been slaughtered. This is happening in heaven. It's a fellowship meal. The word sacrifices is not a bad stigma. So the reason why I say I'm not directing any negativity towards you, I'm just trying to brainstorm as I talk about this because I have to address this. Like every time I do a live video, it seems like I have to address this almost once a video. And I got to figure out a way. I've done videos on it to explain it. People struggle with it so badly. So just pray for me everyone listening, that I can figure out a way to explain to folks with the most succinct, quick passage. I try to give Matthew 22. I try to give Ezekiel 45, Zechariah 14, the context of Leviticus 23, Numbers 28, 29, the idea of what Exodus 23 and Leviticus 23 expounds upon with what an actual feast is, to understand it's just a meal. It's not some weird voodoo, guys. It's not some unnecessary requirement the Father set forth. It's literally his servants, the priests, making a meal for the Father and the priests to enjoy. And that meal is the priest basically saying, look, all these people that have messed up and sinned, I want to have a fellowship meal with you, Father, so that you don't hold anything against them. And as a result of this fellowship meal, this creates atonement. This creates a covering, a temporary covering for you to not consider their bad behavior. Now, the priest was supposed to have good behavior so that he could have the right to enjoy that fellowship meal and metaphorically bring their case before the Father in that regard. That was the point of why the priest had to be set apart above the regular people. He had a greater responsibility. This is why all of them failed until Yeshua came along. That's why Yeshua was prophesied to become a high priest and then became a high priest after his resurrection, because he was perfect in his behavior and he has the ultimate rights to have those fellowship meals with the Father and make sin atonement for us. So this is a process that's ongoing, and because churches do not understand the book of Hebrews, because they do not understand the Old Testament law of priests, therefore they have no clue what their Messiah is literally doing for them right now, which is what Hebrews chapter 8, 1-5 tries to tell you. So it is a great challenge. Yeah, Miss Marcia, I hear you. People get upset because of animals. Again, that's a result of New Age doctrine, that tries to get us to worship the creation greater than we would the creator. It actually stems from ancient Hinduism and this vegan lifestyle, as I mentioned in previous episodes. I even talked about it last night in our Q&A for milk and meat. Is actually also practiced in ancient Egypt. It's a offshoot of pagan theology where they worship the animal to the point where they're encouraging people not to eat meat. But literally eating meat is a part of the Father's instructions, which means an animal is involved in that process. And people think that I've tried to do videos on Genesis chapter 1, 29 and 30 in the Greek to show you that the animals were included in what was told to Adam, what he could eat. The Hebrew Masoretic does not. It completely shades that in a totally different light to make you think that he wasn't allowed to eat animals in the garden or in the very beginning, and that only after the flood. But no, that's not what the Greek says in Genesis 1, 29 and 30. So it's an uphill battle, and I'm not really frustrated. I'm just trying to brainstorm, I guess, on the spot. You guys are seeing me brainstorm of trying to how do I find a better way to explain this quickly, succinctly. But unfortunately, it just may be one of those topics that people just have to start studying to be more familiar with, because they have this weird stigma of, they think that sacrifices are bad. They think, let me put it like this, they think making a fellowship meal with the Father is bad. They've been brainwashed by the enemy through bad doctrines of churches taking stuff out of context to think that that's a bad situation, when literally he calls it good and says that Jesus is doing it for us right now. It's an eternal process. It's always going to happen. He literally says this is our promise that we get fulfilled in Matthew 22 at the resurrection of the saints at the wedding supper of the Lamb. I'll have to figure out a way to better and quickly, more succinctly explain that, so I can create some sort of video on it, and maybe I can try to make it a 2-minute or less video so that I can have it for quick reference for folks. But people really, really struggle with it, man. They really do. Lady Bear, I'm not sure. What's your question again? You saying you think the sacrifices thing getting them so confused? Think that sacrifices thing getting them. Yeah, I'm not sure. Could you phrase that in a question? I'm not sure what you're exactly saying. All right. Exodus 24. Let's finish up the portion real quick. Exodus 24. 5. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, the 70 of Israel's elders. You are to worship at a distance. Moses alone shall approach the Lord, but the others must not come near. and the people may not go up with him. Guys, real quick, verse 2. Moses alone may approach the Lord. Is the Lord standing there at this point, at this specific moment in Exodus 24, when they go up to the mountain to have this Shavuot meal? By the way, this is the meal they're going to be having, guys. It's Shavuot. It's a covenant meal that's every year to renew the covenant every year. Is the Lord standing there? Well, who is the representative of the Lord that's been with them this whole time? It's the angel of the presence. So it's not literally Yahweh standing there. It's the angel of the presence. Now, later, 40 days later, Yahweh passes by, shows his backside. That's a different context. That's 40 days later. In this moment, it's an angel standing there. But this is the agency where he's the representative of the Lord. So it's okay for him to be referred to as, quote unquote, the Lord. He's the angel of the presence. This is what that means. Verse 3, when Moses came and told the people all the words and the ordinances of the Lord, they all responded with one voice. All the words that the Lord had spoken, we will do. Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Early the next morning, he got up and built an altar at the base of the mountain, along with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent out some of the young men of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in the bowls, and the other half he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people, who replied, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. So Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. Then Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 of the elders of Israel. They saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was like a work of pavement made of sapphire, as clear as the sky itself. But God did not lay his hands on the nobles of Israel. They saw him, and they ate and drank. Was Yahweh there, guys? I thought no one could see the face of Yahweh and live. Remember what we talked about, this English translation of the word God? How it can be used for different entities. It can be used for the Almighty. It can be used for the Son of God. It can be used for the angels of God. Or it can be used for human rulers. You guys remember? So this is a moment right here where it's speaking about the human rulers. Excuse me, I apologize. Speaking about the angel of the presence that was there. The human rulers are the nobles who are with Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and Moses. So these are the ones that see God, but it's not the Almighty God. It is the Elohim. They see the Elohim of Israel, literally the angel of the presence that's been with them this whole time. They see him. They see, and there's other angels there, by the way, according to Psalms. So I think that they saw a lot of angels. In fact, let's look. But the angel that speaks with Moses is in the book of Jubilees is just one angel, but they see a lot of them, which is why we're going to follow up with Hebrews 2 and some other passages to explain that here in just a minute. So look at this real quick, guys. In Exodus 24, if we look in the Septuagint as well, 24:10, it says, and they saw the place where the God of Israel stood. That's the angel of the presence. I'm just letting you guys know. That's the word with the Elohim of Israel. This is not the word for the Almighty. It's not Yahweh. They can't hang out with Yahweh and live. They're flesh. This is the angel of the presence that's sent to go before them. And under his feet was as if it were a work of sapphire slab, as it were the appearance of the firmament of heaven in its purity. And the chosen ones of Israel, there was not one of them missing. They appeared in the place of God and did eat and drink. They're having a meal, a Shavuot meal, with the representative of Yahweh, the angel of the presence, to confirm the covenant. This is what a priesthood would do. This is one priesthood, Moses and Aaron, having a covenant meal with a higher priesthood and authority over them who represents the Father. It's all about agency. There's two layers of agency happening in this passage. And all of it is under the guise of them having a fellowship meal called Shavuot to renew the covenant. How interesting. How interesting is this? And what I love this passage in the Septuagint because it actually shows, it actually gives you the correct word for what they saw. It's the appearance of the firmament of heaven, this thing that the angel was standing on, like a sapphire slab. By the way, guys, sapphire can be clear. Hey, Elias, I see you there. I'm going to bring you in just a minute when I finish up this passage real quick. So I just want to point that out here in the Septuagint. It says a sapphire slab. This one says pavement made of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. Well, the sky itself translation is very poorly worded. It should say as clear as the firmament of heaven in its purity, because that is what it's made, in my opinion, it's made of a sapphire crystalline substance that's completely see-through. That's why it talks about being clear in purity. and it is called the firmament of heaven as defined in Genesis 1. So very, very fascinating little moment here, very similar to what we see in Ezekiel chapter 1, where this throne is on this sapphire slab as well. It's almost like some strange transportation platform that the angels use whenever they make visitations. It's, they're just standing on this glorified, clear slab of sapphire, which would make perfect sense with my theory of how the firmament of power, the firmament itself, radiates in the atmosphere electromagnetic energy through the plasma and all of creation, and that's how they can manipulate it to use it to fly. It would make perfect sense, in my opinion. That goes into more of a biblical creation model scientific explanation that I don't really have time to go into today, but there's a lot there, guys. There's a lot there. This is a beautiful moment. They're not looking at God himself. We know that they can't see God and live. They're looking at the angel that went before them, and there's other angels there too, which is what we're going to review in the companion passages. Let me finish this chapter real quick. I'll bring Elias in for his question. We'll review the companion passages, and we'll be done after that. Verse 12, the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and stay here so that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandments I've written for their instructions. So Moses set out with Joshua his attendant and went up on the mountain of God. He said to the elders, wait here for us until we return to you. Aaron and Hur are here with you. Whoever has a dispute can go to them. When Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days, the cloud covered it. On the seventh day, the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop in the eyes of the Israelites. Moses entered the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and he remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. All right. So we'll go to our companion passages here in just a minute. We have Elias calling in with a question. Hey, brother, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How you doing, Sean?
Good. Hey, thanks for calling in. What's your question?
Well, it's more of a general question because, well, I want to say thank you for this teaching today because it helped me connect a lot of dots, especially connecting back to the other stuff I watched of yours and other videos. Especially when you're talking about specifically the portion where you where was dealing how you deal with the servants. And I'm just thinking back. It's like, well, God's really not a respecter of persons, like He said. Yeah, he wants all his citizens to be treated equally. He loves us all equally. And so I'm thinking back and going back all over. I remember how I forgot what it was you were talking about, how you connected the parable of the prodigal son and sort of connected the older son with the angels. And I was like, wow. And I was like, well, yeah, he's truly not a respecter of persons. And what he expects of us, he expects of the angels. So
that's right.
My general question is, do you think really it's just a problem of people trusting in what God has printed and plainly said to them, taking God at His word? Because I think we forget that He said God is not a man that He cannot lie. So we got to trust Him at His word. So do you think that's a large problem of it?
Yeah, I think that people trust in what God has actually said plainly is part 2 of the large problem. Part 1 of the large problem is they don't know what He said.
Right.
No one's reading their Bible. You guys are special. Everyone watching right now, you're in a small minority of people that are hungry for the word. You're trying to learn it, trying to apply it to your life. Just step out into your town 2 feet away from your house and ask people how much they read the Bible. You'd be surprised how few people actually read the Bible, even people that go to church all the time. I've been to a ton of churches in my life where people were not reading the Bible. I won't mention anybody by name or nothing, but I would go to the cell groups. I'd go to the Bible studies during the week, and between the main services, I would go to the youth, young adult groups. I would go to and I would try to ask people questions about the Bible. Nobody's reading it. So how can they even believe it if they haven't heard it? Romans 14, right? How can they believe the message and have hope if no one goes and tells them? They're encouraged to, but there's just a lot of laziness, if you will, for people that don't actually read it. So then once they do read it, their faith muscles, if you will, are not very strong at that point, because they have to get that word in them so that the Spirit can start to grow it in their heart and their mind, as Ephesians 5 mentions, being washed with the water of the word. Because otherwise, we go through two washings in life, right? You're either brainwashed by the enemy or you're baptized and washed in the water of the word through the Father. So there's no other choices. You're going to get washed in something in this life.
Right.
You might as well submit yourself to the washing of the Father and his word. And that's where people don't do that very often. So I agree with you 100%. I think what you're saying, though, from my experience anyway, is part two, or is the other half of the big problem, which is people don't read it. And then when they do read it, they really struggle to believe it because they still have so much of the world in them and the cares of this world. So it's hard for them to grasp onto the promises of God or give the Father the benefit of the doubt long enough, like in Exodus 21, to take the time to look up the words, to look up the history of translations, to look up, the ideas and really start putting one and two together and saying, okay, well, this says this, and then this says I can't treat them differently than the foreigner. And then this one says I can't engage in the slave trade like the other nations. And then this one says I can't actually mistreat them. So then why would I ever believe someone who falsely claims that the Old Testament is horrific and endorses slavery? Right? So it's like I see those arguments all my life by people that hate the Bible, mostly an atheistic crowd. But then you also see them repeated by fellow Christians who just haven't read the scriptures. And instead, all they've heard is bad atheist arguments. So this is where, you, brother, you're in a different class because you're studying, you're looking, you're seeking, you're knocking, you're trying to find the truth, and you're going, you're listening today. So hopefully this has benefited you today. But ultimately, yeah, like it's a huge misconception for people that Yahweh somehow endorsed the idea of oppressive servanthood. And I just think it's such a travesty, which is clearly motivated by spiritual forces, especially in the 20th century, as socialist and communist forces use the idea of the history of slavery in the United States as a racial divisive political issue to inflame one against another, to turn us on ourselves. They've been using it in a sense of race baiting for 70, 80 years now. Because there was genuine transgression in America's history from people that were not following Torah. You know what I'm saying? So they were not following Torah to begin. So now the enemy takes that bad in behavior and tries to claim that, oh, well, the Bible endorses it. And you're like, no, it doesn't. You're not reading the Bible. You're not doing it at all. So it's like, it hurts my heart to see, because I actually have seen pastors and preachers say, well, that was just a different time in the Old Testament. That's why we're freed from the law, because we don't do that anymore. We're in a different place. We're free in Christ, or there's no more slaves in Christ. And I'm like, wait a minute, man. That's not what that verse says. That's not what those words mean. That's not, it's not even the context of the application of those terms. But this is our problem, brother, is we find ourselves having to lovingly explain the words of God to our fellow brethren just as much as to the world. So that's I appreciate your encouragement. Did I address your question at all, or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, brother. You're welcome to stick around and chat. We have another question coming in from Hannibal, so you're welcome to stick around and chat with us, or if you need to take off, it's up to you. All right. Hannibal, hey, how are you today? Welcome in.
Shalom. How are you?
Good. Thanks for calling in. What's your question?
Yeah, so my question is regarding the whole thing about people that don't take the scriptures into context. And I remember watching an interview you did on a show with a person that left the faith, and I think he was going over Psalm 51 that talks about, I was shapen in iniquity and in sin did my mother conceive me.
Yeah, he's trying to preach original sin. Yeah,
exactly. And you made a lot of sense to me, but he was, in my opinion, he was not, he didn't have the understanding of when the scripture is talking about all of humanity or all of mankind, and when it's just talking about, for example, if it was David that wrote that psalm, and taking in context when a word is literal or when it's just trying to paint a picture, so to speak.
Yeah.
So for example, if I'm speaking to my friends that are Protestant or any other type of mainstream Christian denomination, how would I explain to them, well, this is how you actually take these verses or these chapters in context, and not just cherry pick this specific word and take that as literal as possible and twist the scriptures.
Right. Yeah, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
So I apologize if I didn't catch your question.
How would you have a conversation with that when someone is completely set on that this verse or this word has to be taken literal without taking into context. And when you try to show them the greater context, then they're saying that you're twisting the scripture to fit your narrative.
I got you, which is exactly what you saw in that interview, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, because he even went to Romans chapter 8 after that, and he was trying to say that we were not to be glorified, that we were going to be resurrected back to our fleshly bodies, which a few verses down, it literally says you'll be glorified with Christ. So, when you're trying to tell people, like they're trying to say, look, you can't take this in. You have to accept my interpretation, even though it's out of context and it's literal when it's not, even though I'm twisting the meaning of this and I'm not using reading comprehension. That is a battle you have to be patient with. Let the Father of the Spirit do his work, because that's not a person coming from a place of logic or reason. That's not a person looking for truth. That's a person that's trying to argue a point, no matter at all costs. He's sacrificing logic and reason, ignoring reading comprehension, ignoring context. So how do you address those people? You can only do your best to, Mark 4:14, to sower sows the word. You can only give them what the word says and let them marinate on it. Let the Father's Spirit change them according to their understanding of that or not. You yourself, when people have come to that point of stubbornness, in my opinion, there's nothing that you personally can say or do to grandly convince them as far as argumentation. What you can do in your life is continue to be an example of Yeshua, to walk in his behavior, to walk in love. And that will affect people who disagree with you on scripture. I've seen that happen in my life before. When I was actually in college, I went to this, some people's house. Oh, hey, John, I see you there. We'll get you in just a minute, brother. And I went to some people's house, and as I was leaving, like, they all knew I was the Bible guy. So they were trying to have drinks, and it wasn't quite a party, but it was just ended up being a bunch of friends coming over at once. It was turning into a spontaneous get together where people were having drinks. And so I was about to leave, and because I was, there was only a couple of dudes there that knew me very well, and everyone else, this random guy came up to me and said, someone told me that that you like to study the Bible. And so I knew that there was gossip about me at this party, right? This is some random dude comes up to you and asks you that question. So I was like, all right, well, this is turning into the wrong scene anyway. I don't want to be here anyway, so I'm going to take off. And as I was trying to leave, one of the guys that was on the steps outside as I was leaving, he was like, hey, so can you tell me something real quick before you leave? What do you think about organized religion? And I said, well, I don't like it. I think it's Catholic Church is not really, they don't teach the scriptures, and I think they do a lot more harm than they do good. And he was like, what? So that turned into a 3-hour conversation where he had all these ideas about scripture that were completely off because he didn't actually read the book at all. And I was just showing him love and patience as much as I could while not partaking in the wild partying. So me and this dude were wound up in this back bedroom of this apartment, and I'm just going over the Bible with him for 3 hours. And he's literally tearing up and breaking down. And all I'm doing is just explaining the scriptures to him. So that's, in my real life example, that's the best I could offer, as far as you're never going to be able to change their mind on how they choose to misinterpret the scriptures. You can only show them love and offer the word to them as best as you can, and just pray and hope the Father does the work, the greater work that you can't do. Right. So that's what I would suggest. Yeah.
Because, in my experience, when you're talking to someone that already has preconceived biases of something, and you're trying to disprove that, and then you're trying to show them the greater picture of, the kingdom of Yah that is spoken of all throughout scripture. And you sort of start stumbling on things like, the biblical creation model. And then if after a while feels like you're waterboarding them with a whole bunch of topics, and they're just confused. But I'll be praying for that. Thank you so much.
Now you're welcome, brother. Yeah.
Shalom.
Yeah. Have a good day. Shalom. Hey, John, how are you? Thanks for calling.
Hey, man, how's it going?
Good.
Good. Hey, I'm fairly new to just studying this. I've been just learning, watching a lot of your videos. Today's Torah portion talked about the Book of Covenants.
Yeah.
And then it talks about the law. And I know this is a conversation that happens often, where the covenant and the law kind of get bunched up together. Are they separate? Are they one? Can you kind of help me understand that?
Yeah, I actually did an entire video on this. Give me 1 second. Pull it for you. My wife and I actually did a milk and meat on this one night. So let me put this on screen for us to look at, because this is a big question a lot of people have. There's some ministries out there that teach that they are separate, but that we try to show for an hour and 33 minutes with lots of scriptures that it is not. And we go over all the ins and outs of it and all the different verses that people try to use out of context to make that claim. Okay. But essentially the law is the word, Torah, right? And it's the word that is the instructions of God. And here, let me put this link before I finish explaining. Let me put this link in the chat for you. Okay.
Awesome. Perfect.
So that you can, one second, my computer's. Okay, so you can access that later. It's in the chat right now. Okay, but essentially, think about the words themselves in the title of book of the law or book of the covenant, right? So the word Torah is the word law in the Hebrew, the Torah, and it's literally just means instructions. The book of instructions is God's instructions given to mankind are the terms of the covenant. So they can't be separate. The covenant.
So you would say they are one?
Yeah, they're absolutely one. They can't be separate. There is no covenant without terms.
Sure.
There's no contractual agreement without terms, right?
I got you. Yeah, that makes sense.
The contractual agreement, which is called the covenant between man and God, which is this idea of you do this behavior, which is the Torah, the law, the terms of the covenant. If you do the terms of the covenant, I will give you the blessing of the covenant, which is eternal life. This is Leviticus 18:4-5. So we go over all the scriptures in that passage if you want a deeper dig, right?
Yeah,
in that video. But that's the short of it. I know there's prominent ministries out there that have made this into a huge sticking point, and it hurts my heart that they've done that, because it's just another example of people taking words out of context and not looking at their definitions. And so at its most core root, that's what I would encourage you, is just you can't have a covenant without terms. Those terms are literally the law of God.
Well, I appreciate what you do. I've been following you for a while now, so
cool,
I love it.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Hopefully it's been a blessing.
Absolutely.
And thanks for calling in.
Yeah, no problem, man.
All right. Thanks, John.
See ya.
All right. See you next week. Okay, guys. Look for a couple questions here real quick, and we're already at a 2-hour mark, so I need to cut this short. There's just so much meat in these chapters in Exodus today. I could have spent 6 hours discussing them from scripture in different places. This is the core of the Torah, right? This is the core of the instructions of God to us for living. So it's just, if we get these in our heart, memorize these, we'll be incredible husbands and fathers and employees and friends and landowners and animal owners. And you know what I'm saying? Like we'll be stand-up dudes in life. We'll be Abrahams. If we get the passages that I read in Exodus 21, 22, and 23, if you get those down in your life, if you get, flesh those out in the practices of your life and get good at those, you'll be an Abraham in life. You'll be a Yeshua, right? You'll be able to walk in the obedience of the Father and treat people with love and equity. Obviously, no one is literally Yeshua except Yeshua. I'm just giving you an idea of what you can aspire to disciple as someone that you're doing the behavior like they did greatly. They did those behaviors honorably and faithfully, to where they were men that are considered pillars of the faith. They were called friends of God. Abraham was called a friend of God because he did that behavior righteously. Now, was he perfect? No, only Yeshua was perfect. But the point is, like that was the behavior. Exodus 21-22 that we read today. It's not the fullness of it, but that's a lot of it. That's the behavior that they had practiced in their lives that caused them to be such incredible men of the faith and women of the faith. Sarah and Rebecca, they practiced that behavior too, as the book of Jubilee says. They were considered righteous women of the faith. Okay. We get these questions often. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 27. I would suggest you have to read all of Hebrews, for one, as overall context, like I said, because what you're thinking, I will pull this on screen, but what you're thinking it says, it negates what you think it says, literally in the next few verses in chapter 8, verses 1-5, as I've mentioned a few times today in this broadcast. So let's look at it together. But Sergey, it's a question. It's a good question. And you're asking, does Hebrews 7:27 suggest there's no more animal sacrifices? Well, 1 second. We'll go look at it together. All right. So as always, you're just looking at one verse. So we got to make sure we don't cherry pluck verses. But this particular one verse says, he who needs not daily as those high priests to offer up sacrifice first for his own sins and then for the people's, for this he did once when he offered up himself. So he's a high priest. That means he has a job. That means he's doing sacrifices in a temple. This is what Hebrews chapter 8, 1-5 explains to us. Remember, there's no chapters and there's no verses in the Hebrew text, in the Greek text. So this paragraph right here should be right next to this paragraph right here that tells you our Messiah is in heaven offering priests to God, offering sacrifices to God in the heavenly temple. Okay. So there's your first point of context. But secondly, this is speaking specifically about Yeshua being compared to the Levitical priesthood, who did have to offer sacrifices for their own sins before they could sacrifice for the people's. It's also expounded upon in Hebrews chapter 9 as well. And this is why the earlier context of the rest of Hebrews 7 is explaining the differences of the priesthoods of the Levites compared to the Melchizedek, which is what Yeshua stepped into. And it's giving you the differences in the qualifications for those two priesthoods. Then it goes on to give you the differences in the qualifications, if you will, of the individuals offering the sacrifices within those priesthoods. This is why for Yeshua, a high priest, most of the high priests of the Levitical priesthood would have to, because they were mortal and they were full of sin, they had to offer up a sacrifice for themselves. This is in Leviticus 16. Then this is on the Day of Atonement, and then they would have to sacrifice for the sins of the people. So this is what Yeshua does not have to do, because he doesn't have any sin to offer for himself. So he can, as 1 Timothy 2:5 and the rest of Hebrews 8, 1-5, as the rest of the scriptures tell us, he can go before the Father in the heavenly tabernacle and offer sacrifices on our behalf to make atonement for us, according to the law of God, according to the Torah. And he doesn't have to do anything on his own regard first, because he's perfect. This is the beauty of our faithful, perfect Messiah and high priest. So, no, it does not suggest that animal sacrifice is no longer required. In fact, it's actually explaining to you how they're still being carried out by your high priest in heaven. He just doesn't have to go through the same motions as earthly priests, because he does not have sin in his life. So hopefully that's a decent explanation for you, brother. Okay. Jeff, my wife and I do wear them, so I would suggest them. I would personally. I mean, it's very simple to do. It's an instruction, to do as well, and I would wear them personally. Very simple, not hard at all. Just put them on your clothes, little strings, little blue line through them. I think it's really suspect that Judaism takes out the blue line and just says all white. That's literally against the command. But in my opinion, it is like the scriptures say, it's a reminder to keep the commandments. So it's, there's no harm in doing it. It doesn't require anything great or outstanding. It's not a salvation issue. It's a reminder to do the fullness of the instructions of God. So this is, my wife and I wear them. Yes. Okay. Looking back further up in, I think I missed some questions earlier on, but guys, y'all are awesome. I appreciate y'all being here, interacting in the chat. And okay, here was one I thought I missed. Daniel Bicano Atoya is asking, can we call religious sect to the churches that do not teach to keep the Torah? Here's the difference, brother. We've done a show. Actually, let me try to pull this up for you. To answer your question, no, but I'm going to expound just for about 2 minutes. We've already expounded. Great to tell on this channel. You just may not have seen this. This was about almost 8 months ago when we did this video. So you may have missed it. You may not have known us by that time. So let me put this. Okay. So this video right here, I'm going to put it in the chat for you to check out if you're interested to watch it later today. And it is, what if my friends and family don't keep Torah? But this would also apply to churches that think the Torah is a bad thing, even though they're already keeping the Torah, and I'm about to explain that. Put it in the chat for you. You're welcome to check that out later this afternoon if you have time, brother. It's, you know, we're using if you ask if you want to specifically start singling out churches and call them a religious sect because they don't keep Torah, using semantics, and you're isolating yourself and you're also isolating them, you're destroying bridges of communication as opposed to building them. They already do keep Torah. They just don't call it that. It's a semantic issue that you're dealing with. Okay. This is where they teach you to love your neighbor, to love God, to keep the Ten Commandments, although some of them struggle with the fourth commandment. Because they've been taught bad doctrine, but they still teach you not to kidnap people, like you read in Exodus 22. They teach you to respect your animals' property, like you read in Exodus 21. They teach you not to, you know, harshly abuse your employees at your job place, like you read in Exodus 21. They teach you not to neglect your wife, like you read in Exodus 21. They teach in what they don't call it Torah. They don't introduce it as Torah. They are very misconstrued on their understanding of that word because they think it's tied to Judaism. And because they've had a lot of bad Catholic/Protestant teachings carried over through seminary that teaches this idea of supersessionism, which is a form of dispensational teachings. They have bad doctrines, but the general premises that they teach people in discipleship to Jesus Christ, they've got 85% of it correct. They just struggle with the feast days, the dietary laws, the Sabbaths, all the other laws about interaction with humans and loving God. They still endorse and teach that stuff. It's still Torah. They just don't use that word. They're just ignorant of what that word means. So it's a semantic battle you're addressing, and you might be dealing with if you know of a church that thinks the Torah is a bad thing. They're confused. We don't want to fall into their confusion and argue in their confusion. We want to define our terms so that we can show them with love, hey, wait a minute. Yeshua kept the Torah fully. You're discipling after Yeshua, aren't you? You're already keeping the Torah. That's what we want to do for them. We want to help open their eyes in a loving, easy way to see, you know, this is, I can't remember the verse at the top of my head. If anyone remembers in the chat, put it in the chat, where it talks about in the New Testament where it says, if one of you is caught in a sin, you should restore him gently. Right. Well, I'm not saying it's a sin for them to be deceived about Torah, about the definition of that word, and not realizing they're already teaching it anyway. I'm just saying it's the same principle applies. They're caught in a misunderstanding. They're caught in some deception. They're misexplaining something. They don't understand something fully from the scriptures. Well, if you want to help them with that, do it gently. Because sometimes you'll be doing that with an elder. You'll be doing that with someone that's been in the faith longer than you, or someone that's physically older than you. So you would just want to do it with respect and do it as gently as possible. Because, you know, we're all still learning, and we don't want to burn the bridges with these people who are the ripest of the harvest out there. They already have faith in Yeshua. They already want to know his word. That's why they're going to church anyway, right? They're already wanting to be a part of the body of Christ and to be in the fellowship of the ecclesia. So we don't want to make them feel like they're not, because they don't understand the definition of a word, you know what I'm saying, and are falling into some bad teachings. Let's give them the good teachings, right? Let's sow that word in their life. Hopefully that's a blessing to you, brother. Guys, I really appreciate everyone being here. I gotta turn it off. I could keep going, but I've got to do some Shabbat. You guys are awesome. Thanks for joining me, and we hope to see you here next week here on Torah Apologetics. We'll see you next week, guys.